So what I want to propose is that we stop playing our old game and we play a new game instead. I want to open this up by asking you a couple of questions, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about each of them. The first question is, what is our purpose? And I don't mean your individual purpose, I mean the purpose that all of us share. First Corinthians 10:31 says, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all of it to the glory of God. And so, if you'll let me, I want to go from a temporary consensus that our purpose is to glorify God. We exist because God created us. We exist to return glory to the one who created us. So then the second question is, I think, a pretty easy one and a little bit puckish. And it is, do you think that God has misplaced you? Do you think that God is looking around this morning saying, where did I leave that one of my children last night? No, God knows exactly where you are. And Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not incline to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. And what will he do? He will make your path straight. So now I want you to use your imagination for a minute. Imagine that God closed every other door in your life and opened a big fat door right in front of you to where it was just as bold as print on a billboard that God had straightened your path and sent you to wait tables. How would you, while waiting tables, glorify God? You'd glorify God by being the best server you possibly could be. So then the next question would be, if that's where God had put you, would it be okay to spit in people's food? Could you rationalize it by saying, well, Jesus spit in the dirt, made a paste out of it, and used it to heal people, so I'm just doing what Jesus would do? No, you couldn't get away with that. Would it be okay to spit in people's food and then go to church on Sunday and make it all better? No, it still wouldn't be okay. If God had put you in a place to wait tables, then to glorify him you would need to be the best waiter, server you could be, which would not include spitting in the food. So now think for a minute about where God did lead you. God put you on a path, and where did you wind up? You wound up on a college campus. And how do you glorify God here? One of the groups of students I put that question to, students spoke up and said, be a good student. And I don't think that's right. I think, unfortunately, the old game that a lot of us are playing is we have figured out student behaviors, and those student behaviors get in the way. Here's the second temporary working consensus I would like for us to adopt, at least long enough for me to make my point. You glorify God in this place by learning. Not by being a good student, being a successful student, having a high GPA, but by learning. God led you to a college campus. You glorify God on a college campus by learning. Now, the rules that I think a lot of people play by at Northwest Christian University, you might not play by all these rules, but I'm betting at least some of the time you play by some of them. And even if you don't ever play by any of these rules, which it'll be hard to convince me of, you know people who do. I have 3 of them. There may be more, but 3 is what we'll start with. Rule 1 is that you put off as many assignments as possible until the very last minute, and you laugh and brag about it to other people. Now, I'm not talking about when things that you didn't predict and were not in control of, when they get in the way of your work and you have to do things at the last minute because you got backed into a corner. I have no problem with that. Life happens to everybody. But for some people it's a pattern, and it happens time after time, and it becomes this perverse badge of honor. There was one NCU student, I'll give no further clues to this student's identity, and it wasn't even this year, but in a very public setting, surrounded by other NCU students, this person looked me in the eye, was a Christian ministry major, pastoral track, looked me in the eye and said, oh, I do all my papers the hour before they're due. Big smile on his face. And I don't know how you respond to God's call to become a pastor, and then you go to where God puts you, and then you do that little to try to glorify him in the place where he's put you. The second rule that I think a whole lot of people play by is, once you're in a class, you only pay attention to the content of that class until it's over, and you then immediately forget it. And this is a problem throughout the communication program. Many of you who are going to see this video have seen that in classes I will ask people about things they learned in previous classes, and with a big goofy grin on their face, they'll say, "Oh, I don't remember that anymore." Well, of course not. You've taken the final. The class is over. It's on your transcript. But if you're here to learn, the classes build on one another. I wish I had a nickel for every time I have been tough on a student's writing and had the student say to me, "This is not a writing class." They're all writing classes. You're supposed to take writing early because it prepares you for the classes that follow, not, as I sometimes hear, to get writing out of the way. It's not out of the way. The third rule that I think a lot of people play by in being good students is that I only have to bring my best effort when I find the subject matter of a class enjoyable or when I find the class itself entertaining. And if neither of those is true, then I can give my third-rate effort, I can drag my feet, I can complain, I can do much worse than what I'm capable of. And I don't know how you can read your Bible, I don't know how you can study the lives of people who are really completely sold out to God. I don't know how you can do that and think that you only have to bring your best effort when you're enjoying yourself. That's just not how you glorify God. So, I want to propose a couple of new rules. They don't get right down to the heart of all of the old rules, but they're a good start, I think, and they are aimed at not being good students, but learning. The guideposts of these new rules come from some research that was done by Henry Roediger, who's a professor of psychology at Washington University of St. Louis. And what he has done for the past several years is he has been assembling this smoking gun, open and shut case that a lot of what people do when they tell themselves that they are learning does not work at all. It is no more effective than reading your horoscope. It is no more effective than homeopathic medicine, and neither of those things work at all, in case you're wondering. The first thing is I am willing to bet, if you've seen when the exam is in whatever particular class you happen to be, that you've backed off maybe 10 days, a week, and that's when you're going to start getting serious about studying for it. And that very likely is the pattern that you have in a lot of classes. That's real common on this campus. And that's one of the things that Henry Roediger has found does not work at all, because getting serious about studying means putting in long study sessions, and they don't work. Think for a minute about maybe hypothetically, imagine tomorrow night you are going out on a date with the person of your dreams. So today, you're going to go to the weight room in the Mech and you're going to lift weights for 12 hours so you'll look good tomorrow. Is that going to work? No, obviously that's not going to work. If you lift weights for 12 hours today, it may make you too sore to move tomorrow, but it's not going to make you look any better. If you want weightlifting to make you look better, make you stronger, make you healthier, what you've got to do is you have to space it out. You have to do it for a very long time. You have to do only enough to achieve the intended effect, not enough to injure yourself, and you have to space it out over a very long time. You have to start way in advance. So what implication does this have for studying? One of Roediger's findings, and it's backed up by a whole lot of other researchers who've confirmed this, the way you make a long-term memory is spaced repetition. Spaced repetition. The crazy thing about massed practice is the term for long study sessions. In the middle of them, they feel like they're working. You will, while studying, think, okay, I'm starting to get this. Okay, I'm starting to retain this. I'm putting this down for 5 or 10 minutes, and 5 or 10 minutes later, I remember it. But the next day or a couple of days later, you won't. That's why so many of the classes you take, you now can't remember much of anything. But when you go about it the right way with spaced repetition, you learn these things, you commit them to long-term memory, and you keep them. So, how are we going to carry out this rule using spaced repetition instead of massed practice? Well, if you'll look in Beacon Learning, you'll see that I have put up study materials that are in an online service called Quizlet. And Quizlet has flashcards. Now, the way I've set up the flashcards, there's just a short prompt, a single word or a short phrase, and then on the other side, very often, there's a lot of content, because what you need to be able to do is just look at the prompt and then paraphrase all that content. If you can associate that content in your own paraphrase with the short prompt, then you've mastered the material enough that you can start applying it, you can start deepening your learning. But what does that have to do with spaced repetition? Well, Quizlet, first of all, has a free app that you can get for an iPhone or an Android phone or an Apple laptop or for a Windows laptop. And as far as I know, I don't think there are any in-app purchases, so you're not being sold anything. But there's a second platform called Anki. Anki. And Anki was designed to optimize spaced repetition. What Anki will do is it'll have you look at a flashcard. It'll then ask you, how easy was it for you to bring back this information? And you give it a rating on a 5-point scale. And if you say, top rating, it was very difficult, then it shows you the exact same flashcard the next day. And if you again rate it, very difficult to remember, then it shows it to you again and again. And when it gets a little bit easier and you start to remember parts of it, you can move that 5 down to a 4, and now it'll start to wait a couple of days before it shows it to you again. When you get it all the way down to where it's a 1, it's effortless. I remember all of it. I'm having no trouble with this. It still shows you that flashcard, but every week or every couple of weeks. And this is based on data, rigorously designed studies on how memories are formed. Let them decay for a while and then renew them. So, if you happen to know who the first president of the United States is, and if you would like to take tests and have the answer to every item on that test be as easily accessible as the name George Washington, then what you ought to be doing is doing what works to put this content into long-term memory. It can be done. You can take the Quizlet materials, you can put them in Anki, you can make use of that, practice spaced repetition, and then when I ask you a couple of semesters from now about things you learned in this class, then it ought to be, if not perfect, then at least a lot less labor to retrieve it. You ought to be able to retain a lot more. In other words, learn it, not just be a student. Second rule. This one I think a lot of people have already adopted in large part, but I want everybody to adopt it fully, and that is what you need to do is you need to stop reviewing your notes and instead practice retrieval rehearsal. Retrieval rehearsal. You should never take your notes out and look at them and read over them except the one time to make sure that they're complete and they make sense to you. Once you've done that, your notes are no longer for reading. Reading your notes as a form of studying is like going to the weight room in the mech and trying to build muscle by just running your hands over the apparatus. It doesn't do anything. You got to lift it. Well, what do you have to do for your study notes to help you learn material? You got to turn them face down and you got to try to pull it out of your memory, because that's what's going to happen on the occasions that you need to use that information. You're not going to pull your notes out and read them. You're going to try to pull it out of your memory. So anybody who studies by using flashcards, which is a fairly common strategy, you're already using retrieval rehearsal, but we all should be doing it. The third and final principle that comes out of Roediger's work is the idea of elaboration. Now, elaboration, when he talks about it, does not have the same meaning that it has when we use it in everyday speech. You know, I throw out a simple idea, and if I talk about it more and add more detail to it, then I'm elaborating. It has a rather specific meaning in psychology having to do with thinking carefully about an idea and connecting it with your own experience or putting it in a way that is accessible to other people. So, in just about every class I teach, there are elements that are built in that are going to get you doing something active, doing something experiential that applies what we're talking about. And that is elaboration. Another thing you can do in putting together your study strategies is get together in groups. In some of my classes, this is built in. There are assignments that do this. Get together in groups and help one another understand it. Test one another's understanding and explain it to one another. That also works as message elaboration. Now, I'm not saying do this to be nice. I'm not saying do this because I'm a wise old academic and you're young academics and you should sit at my feet and take my advice. This is not casual advice. This is not folk wisdom. This is what carefully designed studies have demonstrated works. When people do this, they learn. They don't go through the motions of being students. They learn. So, that's my invitation to you, that we take some of these old rules and put them out of the way, and we adopt some new rules. And new rules very often feel awkward, unfamiliar, and discouraging at the beginning, but if you stick with them, you get out of them what you put into them. And with these new rules and with some learning happening, I think that we could do a much closer approximation of glorifying God in the place where He's put you.